Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that our audience is out there and that you can hear us right now. I want to say good morning to everybody. I want to say welcome to the Direct Sourcing Forum. We are recording the webinar, so you can request a link to the recording later if you're not able to stay for the full webinar. And we'll also be sending links out to folks who registered but couldn't make it this morning. I do want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. As of showtime, we had 327 registered attendees. This is very exciting. We think it's a great time to be involved in the industry. It's great to see so many old friends out there who've registered. And I do want to extend a special welcome to our international guests. We have folks joining today from Australia, Switzerland, Germany, England, Ireland, Mexico, Netherlands, Panama, Romania, Singapore, and Ukraine. Welcome to all of you. I think I would start off by saying today that many of us believe that we're witnessing the birth of a new industry similar to the rise of MSP programs back in the 1990s. And we created the forum earlier this year because we do believe that direct sourcing deserves its own stage and spotlight. Our mission here is to examine trends, best practices, challenges, and opportunities that are specific and unique to direct sourcing. We believe that opening this dialogue, as we're doing today, with these direct sourcing pioneers and thought leaders, this will help us all to shape a very bright future for the industry. So with that said, let's meet our panelists. Let's start with Karen.
Sure. My name is Karen Gonzalez. I am the EVP for North America for LiveHire. I've been with the company for about a year and a half. Have really spent my entire career kind of in this workforce solutions space. LiveHire has been around for about 10 years, and we have about 150 programs at this point globally. So thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Karen. Jonathan?
Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Prothero, co-founder here at TalentNet. I've been in the industry since 1998, so seen a lot of changes, as Brian alluded to. Happy to chat with everyone today. Thanks for the invite.
Sure. Coop?
Yep. Thank you, Brian. Good morning and good afternoon. And I'm David Cooper. I'm the president of Opptly. We're a direct sourcing platform that engages talent, both private and public marketplaces. Like my co-panelists, been in the space for 20 plus years. And on behalf of Opptly, we appreciate the opportunity to meet today. Thank you.
Thank you, Coop. Praneeth? Praneeth, I believe you're muted.
I just want to do that so you could say that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Praneeth Patlola. I'm the CEO and co-founder for WillHire. There's some news spreading around of what happened to us just recently. As a person, I've been around in contingent staffing space more from building solutions and technology for quite some time. Building talent solutions, that's what we do here at WillHire, is enabling enterprises to deliver better long-term talent acquisition solutions for all sort of talent. Happy to be here. Super privileged to be here with the other peers here to share what we can from our own learnings, walking the path.
Thanks, Praneeth. And then my name is Brian Mcguire. I lead sales at TalentBelt. We offer solution design, vendor selection, and advisory services to customers who are looking to roll out and optimize direct sourcing programs. We've put together 6 topics to talk about today. The topics are based upon attendee feedback, what you guys wanted to hear from us. And what we're going to do is ask these questions in sort of an organized way of each of the panelists, and we'll give the other panelists an opportunity to comment on each question. And then finally, toward the end of the webinar today, we're going to leave some time for additional audience questions. So if you do have questions, you can use the chat feature to submit questions directly to panelists or to myself, the moderator. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Our first topic today is going to be the business case for direct sourcing. And I'll direct my first question to Karen. Karen, who do you think should consider direct sourcing?
So really, I think direct sourcing is a good solution for any company that wants to build their own private bench of talent by leveraging their brand to source that talent and also realize some additional cost savings in the process. I think in addition, if, for those companies that are looking for additional efficiencies within their workforce solution program, whether that be increased fill ratio or speed to hire, those companies would be good candidates for direct sourcing as well. And I think, we know that that a lot of companies, their contingent labor is really growing. So I think if your contingent labor to FTE ratio is fairly high, that this is something you should think about, because that contingent labor pool has a direct impact on your brand. And we know that there's a war on talent. And I think, in order to kind of win this war, or at least stay in the battle, it's really important for organizations to start looking at implementing a direct sourcing solution as part of their total talent strategy.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Karen. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add to Karen's comments?
I could add, thanks, Karen, for kicking that off. Extending to what you said, I think direct sourcing for any program, for any organization to consider is a long-term strategy of talent acquisition. I think we have been talking about total talent for so long in the industry, but at a stage where we are, even headcount management is even a bigger problem. Is how do you manage headcount between a contingent, and can you get a real-time headcount between contingent and a full-time? Is there an opportunity to convert a contract employee who's already been working in the organization to full-time, or any ex-employees to engage back redeployment strategies of any of your existing known talent? So I think to extend what Karen just mentioned, which is, I think we are in the early adoption of direct sourcing in the industry. I think this year we have seen humongous amount of adoption from enterprises. And the key elements for who has adopted is, again, the challenge for talent, the war for talent, like Karen mentioned. But the most importantly, organizations are also looking at, or companies who are looking at, how do we enable overall 360-degree talent acquisition funnel, and how do we engage talent in a faster and a better way for contingent, so that you can create a channel of that particular acquisition channel from contract to full-time. So I'll stop there. I can keep going, but
no. Okay, no, thanks. That's a great answer, Praneeth. Appreciate it. We want to talk now, still in the context of the business case for direct sourcing. What are the benefits? What's the ROI that customers should be looking for in a program? And what are you guys typically seeing? I know you represent different install bases and that sort of thing. So I'd like to hear, specific to your programs, what are the business case drivers that you're encountering? And Praneeth, I'll allow you to do a quick kickoff on this, and then I'd like to pivot to Jonathan and Coop for their insight.
Great. That's a great question. And I think the primary benefits or takeaways of any business case starts, especially because most of our buyers are going to be procurement and procurement industry driven. We always see cost as a biggest factor, but it also depends on each individual program. Many a times it's not cost. And just recently we started having conversation with the hashtag no cost savings. So it also depends on the program and also depends on the market. Can you bring in a cost saving? Cost saving is kind of a roadmap over a period of time. But the most important element is, how do you attract talent in a faster way? How do you engage talent to create a really deeper talent engagement is going to be the key benefits. The bigger takeaways for direct sourcing is going to be talent engagement, enabling candidates to redeploy themselves or self-identify themselves within a pool when they have an interest, bringing in a robust referral program into a model of contingent program, which is lacking in our industry. When organizations are taking advantage of that referrals, there is a group of community engagement and credibility around the talent pool, quality, and several other aspects of it. I want to give a few more minutes for our peers here to chip in, because that topic is such a long topic in itself.
It is. Jonathan, over to you. Other than what Praneeth just mentioned, what benefits are you seeing for your customers? I'll just pause there and let you respond.
I think he's right around cost savings. I would say the big four that are typically managed by an MSP when they look at a program being cost savings, time to fill, worker quality, and experience of the worker are obviously different levers that can be pulled. Typically what happens in traditional models is you pull one of those levers and unfortunately something else has to give. If you want a great experience, that might cost more. The beautiful thing about direct source is you can pull all of those levers in the right direction and have a positive outcome. And I'll add one that's typically not talked about a lot, that is becoming more and more important to big firms with global brands, and that's risk. When you're dealing with a preferred supplier list, and don't get me wrong, they provide a great value, but you have no control over what your message is in the marketplace. You're giving your brand to a third party to then go out to market and have discussions about your brand. In a direct source strategy, you get control back. So you can certainly save time, improve, increase quality, have a better experience, and save money, but you also reduce the risk of having someone else manage your brand day to day.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Coop, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, probably what I'd add, I mean, I agree with my peers on all of the values on the buyer side of the equation, but it's a two-sided equation. So you also, I think, have to look at the candidate side when you look at the benefits of direct sourcing. You look at the war for talent, you look for innovative ways to source talent. And, you know, for us, there's certainly all the attributes of why customers would do this, but a lot on the candidate side, you know, just their preference to connect directly with those seeking their services, connect directly with the brands that they want to work with, and connect directly in the way they connect on other platforms, you know, the Ubers, the Airbnbs. It's such a connected platform environment that I think there's also some thought leadership around, you know, maybe the candidate wants to do this, and that's an additional value on top of all the buyer side benefits.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, let's move on to
I wanted to add, extend the most important element David just touched, that is the candidate experience part of it. I think we're all living in a world of experiencing great experiences. Imagine your experiences going to an online store in digital world, or, you know, taking an Uber ride, or taking a Lyft ride, or ordering your food on a phone. I think we are all experiencing today, or living in a world where, as individuals, we expect a better user experience. And I think candidate experience is such a key element, which is part of the direct sourcing delivery model. And I think any organization who intends to capture, measure, care, and deliver that, this is super, super important.
Okay, thanks, Praneeth. Appreciate that. Our next topic will be talent pool population strategies. So again, from your own individual perspectives, I'll ask you to comment on 3 different questions with regard to talent pool populations. So let's go ahead and start with Jonathan. Jonathan, where are your candidates coming from in your programs? Where are you seeing success?
A good question. It really does depend on strategy, but in a traditional direct source model, brand is number one. A lot of people have questions on brand, and I know we'll touch on that later, but even an average known brand or a local brand can still have a lot of power in their ability to attract candidates directly. It's been happening in the talent acquisition full-time ATS space for decades now, where organizations use their brand to try to attract and retain talent themselves directly. Failing that strategy, they go to third-party providers to help them fill the hopper. That strategy can absolutely be deployed in a direct source contingent model. So even if you've got a brand that isn't globally recognized, like some of the ones out there that we all see every day, you'd be surprised at the power of what your brand has, not only through places like Indeed and ZipRecruiter and other external sources, but your own social media platforms, and certainly your career page. An interesting exercise for all those watching is get some stats on what your career page pulls in on a daily, monthly, or annual basis. I think you'd be surprised. Even a not so well-known brand can pull in tens of thousands of visitors to their career page on a monthly basis. And right now, unless you're running a direct source program, they're seeing 0 contingent roles. So that is the easiest and what I'd call low-lying fruit of launching a direct source program, is use the people that are already visiting your brand on a daily basis.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Karen, over to you. What are, in your opinion, the best sources for talent with regard to what LiveHire is seeing right now?
Sure. So some of you may know who Laszlo Block is. He used to be the VP of People at Google, and he wrote a book called Work Rules. And his research showed that the highest quality source of talent comes from a company's past candidate database. So we really believe that's one of the most lucrative sourcing channels that your company can tap into for contingent labor. And through our own research, we know that most databases contain about 50 times more candidates in the database than their current workforce, and that 40% of those candidates that applied for full-time work would also consider taking a contractor role. And so I think that's a missed opportunity. We can refresh that database by inviting the candidates from your past candidate database to join a talent community. We'll know who is still available for work. It will allow you to leverage the investment that you've already made in sourcing that talent, and ultimately help you to scale a little bit faster. Ultimately, we recommend an omni-sourcing strategy. So that would include, other sources such as referrals, passive candidates, job boards, programmatic advertising, et cetera. And that kind of those two things will help you scale more quickly and just continue to build those talent pools going forward.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. I'll pivot over to Coop and then Praneeth for their thoughts on what do you consider to be the best sources for talent within your programs? What are you typically seeing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is what a keyword Karen just said in terms of omni-channel, using as many channels as you can to find the broadest net of talent available. Certainly direct sourcing platforms are allowing companies to optimize their brand advocacy, right? Touch into the known workforces, the known workers, the known databases, and repurpose those workers in a very specific way for that client brand. Some other innovations that we've seen in the marketplace would certainly be on the public talent cloud sourcing as well. So certainly leveraging private pools that are known talent within that customer base, but also leveraging direct sourcing technologies kind of as demand aggregators, excuse me, to source talent beyond the brand and to source talent beyond those that are known to that specific client. Okay. And Praneeth, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I think I want to extend Karen's note. I'm a big fan of that book. And back in 2008, one of my friends used to work at Google, and he had this poster on his desk which said, please refer people like you. We like to hire people like you. And this goes back to this Silicon Valley ninja recruiting techniques, is going door-to-door tapping from a list of people from a day zero when you're onboarding, part of an onboarding process, so that you can actually increase your internal funnel of candidates who know from the candidates whom you just hired because they are super qualified. So that model of a known talent or reaching to the network through a known talent is kind of going to be a really key unique way that we are seeing from a pattern. Is how do you create a really creative, highly adaptable referral program to create invitations through your known talent who are your top hires already. That applies to contractors too, not just for the full time. And I think from a source point of view, I think we'll all have to step back sometimes and realize that each customer program is different because the job categories, the locations, and what are the needs for a program are different. Sometimes when you're in day zero and you don't have an enablement to go and launch your career site connecting to your existing source, you always have to look for what other things you have at your hand which can drive that. Can you touch your known talent? Are there data privacy issues your legal is not going to pass through? If not, then what is your talent attraction modeling by looking at the standard way the HR tech industry runs, which is the recruitment marketing model. In the recruitment marketing model, you're going to create an organic and you're going to create an inorganic model. The challenge is on the inorganic. Can you really generate the best cost per applicant and generate the right traction using the cost model? And that's where things get more interesting from how do you build a recruitment marketing strategy?
Thanks, Praneeth. Coop, I'm going to go over to you. What would be your comment on your most innovative sources in terms of talent pool population? Again, what is there anything you would add to the conversation that we haven't covered right now that has been particularly innovative and has worked for you guys?
I think a lot of the innovation we're seeing in the marketplace is just the power of proprietary AI. When you look at the candidate experience, right? When you order a car from Uber, you want to know that car's close to you. It's not coming from 300 miles away. So when you are a candidate in a direct sourcing platform, you want to know that the job recommendations that are being posted to you are accurate. You're like, I can do this. This is a skill I have or a skill I want to do. So I can't emphasize enough that when you're talking about the candidate experience and the control being with the candidate and building, either these public or private talent communities, you have to have accuracy in your AI and your matches, or your candidates will start to drop. And then your candidate pool, health will suffer, if you will. So really for us, a ton of it is around public and private, as well as the AI matching and having a proprietary capability to be highly accurate with those matches.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks, Coop. Appreciate it. Let's move to our next topic, which will essentially be about implementation, best practices around implementing a direct sourcing program. And I think, Jonathan, we'll go ahead and lead with you here. First question for you is, what are you seeing as an average implementation timeline among the programs that you've rolled out?
Typically anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. I know that's a wide variety. It depends on a number of factors. First and foremost, is there a VMS in play? We're thankful to have partnerships with some of the leading VMSs, so that helps move things along pretty quickly. That said, you typically run into two major issues in an implementation. One being legal. As we all know, legals can bind things up quite extensively and for a long period of time. And the other is brand. To effectively drive a proper direct source program, you need brand approval, not just on logos and colors, but on things like language. What's the communication going out to your workers? Sort of what I touched on earlier in terms of avoiding risk, taking control back of the message. So those things can take a little bit longer in terms of time. From our platform perspective, getting the tech up is often one of the easier steps. It's typically more of the business process change. How is it going to work with the MSP? Who is your curator? How are they going to interact in the process? And then what's the strategy? What's the long-term goal? What are you trying to get out of this? Is it a redeployment strategy of alumni, or is it truly using your brand in the market to build a talent asset? So it really does depend, but typically it's reasonably quick from I guess you'd call it a software world. 6 to 12 weeks is the average.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks. And what are, to the other panelists, would you like to comment on that? What are you typically seeing for an average implementation timeline in your programs?
I would agree with Jonathan. I think that's a good range. I always like to say, like, we can move as fast as the client will approve, because most of the time it is, approval of branding and things of that nature that sometimes will hold up the process. So that can be, that timeline can be decreased dramatically if we can get approvals quickly.
Okay.
And
I would echo on the private marketplace. It takes that amount of time. Most of ours are all integrated with the VMS, so that's not the harder part, right? It's more around the process, the legal, getting the marketing assets, et cetera. We find public is quick, but we find the private it can take that 6 to 12 week time frame.
Okay, thanks. Coop, Praneeth?
Yep, I think it could be even a bit longer in cases where customers are looking at a journey where of bringing their applicant tracking system and the known talent ecosystem. And many a times you're dependent on the data to kickstart your existing or the baseline of the talent pool. So sometimes it is much faster as hey, sign this MSA. We already got a brand approval and get things started and launch. It could be like a week. But at the same time, when you're looking at a much more complex implementation strategy of building, hey, can you repurpose our existing Talent Plus? Can you repurpose our subscriptions that we already have from a talent recruitment modeling? In those cases, you go much deeper in having marketplace conversations with the talent traction players of job boards and subscriptions and how to repurpose them. And also sometimes you have to hijack the organic channels in the same fashion. So it's more on the planning side. And then to warm the talent pool, you have to give it a few weeks. We usually have a 3-week rule to say that, to get at least 15 to 20% of your talent really activated and engaged, usually give it 3 weeks. And if you're looking at a geolocal strategy, you got to go like geolocal approach. You can't go all in one approach. So you have to go with a very segmented location and a zip code approach. If the need for the program, let's say, is light industrial, you have to go from one location to other location, unless you have capacity to service. And so and the customer has the capacity on their end to adopt in all the 100 to 200 locations at once, which I haven't seen. So usually you pick like 5 or 6, and then you create like a 12 months roadmap. So after 12 months, you truly go back to like completely direct sourcing the program based on the nature and the program size and the category.
No, thanks, Praneeth. And Praneeth, quickly back to you. On average, or what are you typically seeing for customer resource requirements when you're about to roll out a program? Who do you typically work with on the customer side?
It's super important and most interesting question for us is because one to highlight, it's extremely challenging when your customer is not available for conversations because everyone is so busy. And this is an add-on initiative on top of 100 things a customer is doing. Especially for self-managed, it's even much more difficult because they're managing the program, they're managing the vendors, they're managing all the issues, and now you have this new. So as long as there is at least one person who is leading the initiative, have enough bandwidth to drive the first part of implementation journey. If it is even self-managed or non-self-managed, in both the cases, I think it's like having that one champion is super important. But beyond that, it totally depends on the implementation strategy. Does the customer wants to do self-curation? And we have seen those patterns of a customer doing that. And how many resources do you need within that on a customer end is going to be dependent on how large your program is, what parts of your program are you trying to address for direct sourcing, how many applicants you really are going to process. On a flip side, many a times you have to bring in multiple channels within the customer. For an example, many of the employer branding key elements and strategies are hand-holded by an internal HR team, also coupled with marketing team. So you need to have a larger project plan at hand to ensure that everybody is engaged from day one to set an expectation. We need time from each and every one of these to explain of what this is, because when you go back and say we're going to use brand to attract talent, the marketing person says, no, you can't do that. But you're already doing that. And so having that conversations early on and giving them enough bandwidth from an employer branding, marketing, and also the resource enablement within the customer base is super important. So it could be as long as one person to even sometimes 7 people.
Okay. No, thanks for the detailed answer, Praneeth. Appreciate that. Coop, next question for you is about ramp up in a program. So from go live, what does a program typically look like after, say, 6 months or 1 year? How long does it take you guys to ramp up a program on average?
Yeah, a couple of things, and even pre-go live, a couple of thoughts. Because a lot of times people are like, where do I use direct sourcing? And is this simultaneous to my supply base? Is it integrated with my VMS? Is it optimized with my MSP or VMO process flow? I mean, a few thoughts. One, a couple of advices that I think we would all collectively give. One, be data driven. Right, most of these programs are implemented with a VMS in place, at least on the contingent side. Right, so use data coming out of the VMS to identify where direct sourcing, would apply to make informed business decisions. Understand your usage, your geographies, your job descriptions, your job title, taxonomy, and examples of what does good look like, and encapsulating all that to really think on why do we want to implement direct sourcing? What are we trying to solve for? Is it to get broader access to talent? Is it to change the candidate experience? Is it to get cost savings? But really think through why you're doing it and make sure direct sourcing solves for that. And I say that because, myself and maybe some of my panelists, we often get, inbound calls, hey, we're paying way under market. does direct sourcing fix that? We really can't if you're paying way under market. It's the wage going to the worker, which we don't touch within our margins. Another time we'll get calls, we want to put it in a remote geography where there aren't workers within 100 miles of that facility. Again, that's a very tough use case. So I'd say, use data, be prescriptive about where you deploy direct sourcing, and keep in mind why you're implementing direct sourcing, because then that comes back to your question, Brian. What does that look like long term, right? When you do that discovery in advance and you apply the right use case, and you can have direct sourcing based upon customer behavior, at 30%, 40%, 50% of the recs. It really just depends on, do you have the right use case? Are you using data to make informed decisions? And then how's the client going to help roll this program out?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Coop. Appreciate it. Karen, over to you. What are some common pitfalls to avoid when you're rolling out a program?
Great question. And I could probably spend the remainder of our time focused on this area, right? And I'm sure my peers could feel the same. Coop touched on some of this, but I think first, really understanding what you want the outcome to be. What are you trying to achieve by implementing a direct sourcing program? You'd be surprised at how many clients say, we want to do this, but they don't really know what success looks like for their organization. I think in addition, make sure that you're choosing partners that align with what you're trying to accomplish. Our recommendation is that you use partners that don't have a bias, that their sole focus is dedicated to your program, that in terms of the curation partner, so that you're able to scale the program and achieve those desired outcomes. I think too, just getting buy-in internally, making sure that everybody's aligned and on the same page about, again, what those outcomes are going to be, that you've got the right people involved that are going to help you achieve those goals. I think too, candidate engagement is really important. And we've talked a lot about this during our conversation today. I think making sure that you've got partners, both technology partners and curation partners, that have a high focus on the candidate experience. You can look at NPS scores. I think ideally, if you're looking at NPS scores, you want them to have an NPS score of at least 50 to ensure that those candidates will continue to refer people to your organization, will also reapply for roles. I also think that there's a misconception out there that direct sourcing is going to replace your entire, supply base. Mm-hmm. And you heard Coop talk a little bit about RAMP, and we see direct sourcing as a channel, and certainly it's something that will scale. But when I'm talking to clients, I always talk about the optimization of your supplier base, right? Just like when you implement an MSP, there's usually some optimization that will occur. Same thing with direct sourcing. And it's not a day one scenario where all of a sudden you have less suppliers, but it is something that you can continue to look at to optimize your supply base. And I think finally, just, your organization better than anybody else. And I think, most companies don't have their MSP choosing the VMS or the VMS choosing the MSP. I think it's really important for companies to make their decision regarding direct sourcing, what that looks like, and their partners independently, and make sure that whoever you choose can also work with the partners that you have, the VMS partner and MSP partner. But ultimately, you should be making that decision because you know your organization better than anybody else, and you don't want to introduce bias into that decision-making process.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Karen.
Sure.
We're going to head into our next topic today, which is curation. And I'm going to ask Jonathan to kick us off on curation. And my first question is, what does a good curator do?
Yeah, I think Karen touched on some of this in the last answer, but it really depends on who is your curator and what is your strategy. Karen mentioned starting with a goal, and I absolutely agree. Organizations look at direct sourcing thinking, hey, this is a great idea, but they don't typically have a goal in mind until they really start to sit down and think through it. Curators, there's sort of three options that we've seen play out in the marketplace. You can obviously work with your MSP, work with someone from your PSL or a preferred partner of some nature, or bring it in-house. And there's advantages and disadvantages to all three of those, and it changes your strategy. Obviously, and I'll start the last there, in-house. Typically, the least that we see in an in-house is usually an extension of the talent acquisition team. If procurement or HR contingent are working closely with talent acquisition, the challenge there is often funding. Obviously, in-house, not a lot of procurement or contingent departments have the funds to hire a group of curators, let alone the expertise to train them. We do see it, and we've seen success, but scalability becomes a bit of an issue. Obviously, working with an MSP that has the capabilities to do it, in terms of what they do, and it's an extension of their day-to-day. Not all MSPs are created equal. If I look at our early success in direct sourcing, almost every client we have, Fortune 500 or not, were filled by someone from the PSL, often a diversity supplier that comes in and fills that role. I think the MSPs have made big progress in the last few years to put together some programs that will absolutely fill successfully in a direct source model. But in those extensions of their team, it's really a bolt-on versus having to work directly with a third party, whether that be someone from your PSL or not. So what they do day to day is going to depend on who that individual is. Obviously, in an in-house managed, it's really a payroll relationship versus an MSP. It's an extension of what they already do. But engaging with your talent on a daily basis is their number one role. Karen touched on this as well, sort of that white glove journey that you want in a direct source. And I go back to risk and controlling the message. That's a huge part of what the responsibility is of a good curator. Ensuring that workers have a good journey, but also, one of the biggest concerns in the traditional staffing model is follow-up. No ability to get updates on my resume. Where did it go? I submitted it. It disappeared into a black hole. That's part of what a curator's responsibility is as well. You go back to the power of a brand. Depending on how big your brand is, you could have hundreds of applicants for an individual role. And it's part of the curator's responsibility to not only go through those applicants, but make sure those people get a good journey so they're there for the next opportunity if they're not selected. It's a role that does differ from your traditional staffing because, again, it's under a specific brand and a specific message. But a strong curator can certainly create an environment where not only you grow your talent community, but you give a much better experience for your folks that are applying for roles.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Praneeth, I think we're going to go over to you. Coop, did you have a comment that you wanted to add? Oh, all good. So Praneeth, next question is for you. When you're either designing or rolling out a program and you're working with a curator, what is your experience in determining how many curators should be supporting a program? How do you arrive at that?
Before I answer that, I really want to step back a bit and say that curation is not putting bodies together and responding to it. I think curation, we have mixed up the model of curator and calling curators and renaming recruiters as curators or sourcers or vetters in recruitment industry as curators is what we're trying to achieve. And people are getting confused for that. I think curation in part of a direct sourcing is a strategic sourcing modeling and strategy at a higher level. In our role, we call this as direct sourcing program management. That's where it starts with, from your building. What kind of team are you going to build is based on, and we can talk about internal, external, and overall, but in an overarching strategy, you would need a direct sourcing program management. What is the key strategy? What is the brand strategy for contingent? What is your contractor value prop messaging or the candidate value prop messaging that you're building? That is basically the employer branding element of it, and also looking for data. So how are you managing data? Like Karen mentioned, the NPS scores. Who's running the service of NPS scores, monitoring it, analytics, and combining that into more of program management service, but then extending that into talent acquisition attraction modeling. Your talent attraction modeling is again a key element of, are you getting enough data? If you're not getting data, if you're getting enough applicants, what is the cost of those applicants? You're designing those top level two from a brand enablement, program management, talent attraction, and then you're vetting the candidates, screening the candidates, designing a program. Part of it is what does your curation process looks like when applicants are coming in? How are you curating them? Is it a checklist? Is it a bunch of questions? Is it an assessments? Is it an automated assessments? Is automated assessments even applicable for you? Once you answer those from a program level, because it's again related to program job category, that's when we drill down. We're going to generate these many applicants below the top line of team. You're going now to the bottom line of team who are strictly focused on managing candidates, having those human touch engagements of the candidates, becoming the customer service reps to respond through any of the text engagements or in-app engagements or several other hand-holding modeling before they are handed off to the payrolling team. And many a times the curation contacts typically becomes, and we are seeing the pattern of they becoming the point of contacts in many cases for any post-hire models or even offboarding models. How do you re-engage them? I think the answer to the question, I don't know if I answered that question of how many. I think you need to create a model and understand the program structure, understand what elements of an appetite is possible for that particular program implementation, which then you invest into building the program strategy, the attraction and recruitment marketing strategy, the employer branding modeling. Each of that itself could be an individual functions, or it could be combined into a more of an overlapping function with one or two resources, and then take an ability of how many applicants are you going to process? What is your goal for processing those applications? How fast can you process? Any delay, like Jonathan mentioned, the black hole syndrome, that you are in this to deliver the best candidate experience. So you better deliver the candidate experience, not keeping them on hold for 7 days, not processing an application. That should never happen.
Okay. Thanks, Praneeth. Coop, I'm going to head over to you with the next question. Then I'll mention everybody just watching time here. We're down to our last 18 minutes here. And we do have a couple of more topics to cover, as well as we'll try to take a few audience questions. But so Coop, again, in the context of curation, what do you think the value prop is to the talent themselves? What's the value prop of good curation?
I think when you look at a direct sourcing solution, it's typically a three-leg stool. You've got a direct sourcing technology platform, you have a curation service layer, then you have an employer of record or payroll service layer. But the curation is critical when you're looking at the candidate experience. Technology does filtering, people do curation. The amount of curation you're going to do is going to radically differ based upon the labor category. So in common skill sets, you may have very little curation because you're using assessments and online tools just to source, if you will, more commoditized skill sets. Conversely, you're on an IT professional, you need much more depth to your curation side. But the value prop to the worker, again, a lot of this goes back to the initial outreach to the candidates and making sure that the AI is matching the candidates correctly, making sure that the candidate is having a great experience at the time of campaign that says, hey, this matches exactly what I do and I've always wanted to work here, so that the curator, the goal is to start the curator at a much lower number of candidates that they have to work with versus starting at a higher number and working their way down. In terms of the value prop of the candidate, again, this is a candidate-driven market. It's a war for talent. You have markets where there are 8 jobs for every worker, and you have to make sure that that curation, people to people, is timely, your AI is accurate, and that you're driving the candidate experience the candidate is wanting for the ultimate outcome. So again, I would say focus heavily on the experience you want your worker to have, and whether you're doing it internally or externally, assuring the handoff for the candidate experience.
Okay, that's great, Coop. Thanks for that answer. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Let's move into our next topic, which is the importance of employer brand. And I'm going to ask Praneeth to lead this off, and then I'll ask Jonathan for his comments. So Praneeth, to you, why is employer brand important? Why is it important to use it? And are you using it in all of your programs, or are there circumstances where you're not?
This is the most important question for direct sourcing program, because we are going from not using a brand, part of the traditional recruitment models that we have adopted in the contingent model, to switch over to re-engaging and employing the brand? One, to answer your question, almost all the programs, not almost, every program in our portfolio uses employer brand. If they don't, they are the customer we least prefer to work with. They are like the least prefer. They are still in the funnel until they mature into it, but our attention span to that particular customer is very, very minimal because they're still not committed to direct sourcing or understand the importance of why brand is such a critical element. Second, as an example, why it is so important is, one, if you call up any candidate today when you are a recruiter, and what is their user experience? If you look at most of the recruitment today is done digitally through job boards, through engagements, through email, through SMS and enablement. When you are reaching out or when there is an inbound traction modeling coming in, if the job says my client is looking for a role to be filled, it's like going on Amazon and saying, I'm not going to tell you what the smartphone brand is unless you check out and pay the price. That's never going to happen. That's not the world we live in today. So there is information which is missed out. That's a basic problem to be fixed in the industry. That's the most important element. Why that is? Because second, there's no candidate who's saying, I would love to work only for a staffing company for all my career. That's not, there is no candidate I have ever seen in my recruiting experience ever say that. So it's always going to be, who's the client? That's a question every conversation in an industry has in that. So that is why it's so important. And the result of that is when we started a few campaigns, completely organic, we were able to generate 380 applicants without any investment using an employer brand, without even repurposing a customer's career site, just from Facebook. I know Facebook was down yesterday. We had a traffic impact too, but that shows the power of employer branding. Second, when you're trying to create talent pools for future, which is what your redeployment, re-enablement, keeping the talent, all these multiple talent engagement strategies are void if you don't use your brand. Your brand as an organization and building a talent brand and messaging, which is so key important because of candidate experience, candidate engagement, creating that near branding engagement and experience is key of that funnel. Without that, I think all the attraction strategies, all the engagement strategies keeps failing every day. There is nothing different than what we do today if you remove the brand out of it.
Okay, no, it's a great answer. Thank you, Praneeth. Appreciate that. Actually, Jonathan, I'm going to go to you for the next question. What if you're dealing with a client whose employer brand or the industry that they're in isn't particularly attractive to workers? What can you do to overcome that?
Sure, good question. And on brand in general, I'll just add to what Praneeth was saying. It's important to know that your brand's already being used. Whether staffing firms are using it directly, overtly in their ads or not, the first thing out of their mouth when they talk about the job is this opportunity is with such and such a client. So that's already happening. The difference in a direct source model is you're filling your database owned by the client as your own asset versus that of the supplier that's using your brand to do so with theirs. Again, not taking away from your preferred supplier list. They, as Karen said earlier, you don't eliminate your suppliers in a direct source model. But back to your specific question around brand, it goes back to something I said right at the beginning of the call. You would be surprised, regardless of who your brand is, whether you're, as Praneeth said, your Facebook or you're a local firm based in upstate New York. It doesn't particularly matter. If you go look at the stats that are being driven from your career page, I bet in most organizations, they would surprise those from the procurement department in terms of the flow that they get to their brand. Every brand has a certain amount of attraction. Otherwise, that organization would not be in business. So, the first step is actually using your brand to your advantage, because right now that is not typically being done in the traditional contingent model.
And I just want to close the thought of, like, imagine this, right? People not knowing, people are looking for a role and somebody else is having a conversation and you're trying to hide the information in an online listing. For me, that's pathetic. That needs to be addressed as an industry and overall.
Thank you. So we are down to our last 10 minutes. I think we're going to take a few questions from the audience right now. I think, Karen, let's lead with you, and then I'll give a question to Coop too. And then just to remind the panelists, we do have one more topic that we want to try to get to in our last couple of minutes, and we'll just kind of do maybe a round robin with you guys on thoughts on the future of direct sourcing. But first, here's a question. We've seen about 40 questions come in on the chat here, and we're trying to look at that. One question that I've seen come up a couple of times, how do you keep workers in a talent pool available and engaged so that, you know, when you're trying to query the talent pool, they actually are available and there?
Yeah, so I'm going to touch a little bit on brand as well, because this really relates to candidate engagement. So I think if you have a brand that is not as well known, you really need to think about the candidate engagement and their experience, because how they are engaged will really dictate how they feel about your brand. And so it's important that your partners have an engagement strategy. We call it a candidate journey. We know that typically when somebody applies for a job, they're not necessarily available at that moment. Sometimes they may not be available for a month or two. So how do you keep them engaged in that process? And it's has a lot to do with kind of the moments that matter. That's what we refer to them as, and only engaging them when there's something really relevant to say. So spamming them to death is not going to help. They don't need to know everything that's happening with our company or every single job that's available. It's really kind of establishing this anchoring where we only reach out to them when it's relevant. And once they have that, once they start engaging with us, we communicate through two-way SMS texting. So they can actually look back to see, okay, this person reached out to me about a job. I'm going to go ahead and respond to this. So it's kind of that social anchoring that we establish. And then we make sure that we continue with that journey, and that we're only contacting them with really relevant information that's important to them.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Thanks, Karen. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that? Okay, let's take another question here. Do we need to have a VMS in order to do direct sourcing? And can we use our applicant tracking system as an alternative to a talent pool?
Yeah, I think I'll say yes and yes. You would need to identify the internal systems that are being used today in place of a VMS to understand, requisition approval, the inbound, outbound integrations on the rec and candidate side, but definitely not a requirement, but it does ease the workflow when it does exist.
I'd agree with Coop on that. I'd say the only thing there is scalability as well. ATSs are built for traditionally full-time. VMS obviously built for contingent, different approvals and workflows. If you've got 3,000 or 4,000 contingent roles a year, maybe not the best solution, but it certainly can be done.
Praneeth or Karen, anything to add?
I think, yes, extending that, one key careful element while you're considering to use an ATS is to enable the contingent model, because most of the ATSs have been always focused towards the full-time talent modeling. So enabling that contingent models, like ensuring your ATS actually supports the models of the contract talent model, is super important. As long as that is there, extending that is going to be easy enough, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is a requisition to an applicant tracking and enabling that particular for a manager to close out. So as long as it supports, I think we should be okay. But I think there will be a lot of debate because of most of the ATSs in HR tech world today are already pre-coupled with a CRM internally or externally with a strong integrations already to the market. In a mid-market world, but in an enterprise world, it's a completely different. There are multiple integrations, and I think it's more applicable to enterprise, where we have seen success factors still used towards the contingent labor program management. So that's a key example that it can coexist without even a VMS.
Okay. Thanks, Praneeth. So we're down to 5 minutes. Let's move on to our final topic, which is thoughts on the future of direct sourcing. Karen, I'm going to direct the first question to you. I know you guys did a white paper recently, I think with SIA, and it may dovetail nicely with the question, but what are your predictions on customer adoption for direct sourcing?
Great question. So we know that customers are facing cost pressures, growth, high demand, and this war on talent that we keep talking about. I know we've been redundant, but it's really important. And they're facing all of these things while trying to create this, create agility within their workforce. So the research that we did indicates that 60% of enterprise buyers will implement a direct sourcing solution within the next 2 years. I really think it's not a matter of if, but when. So companies are looking to create their own internal bench of talent rather than solely relying on third parties. And I think COVID really accelerated conversations regarding direct sourcing because they still needed talent. They still are looking for cost savings. So I expect that adoption will absolutely happen, but I think it could actually happen sooner. I think the next 12 months are really critical, and we're going to see a lot of momentum and growth specifically in this space.
Great. Thanks a lot, Karen. That's a great answer. So Coop, over to you. What do you think the impacts will be, if any, on the staffing industry as we know it right now?
Yep, I think it's the same as the MSP VMS inflection point 20 years ago when these solutions came to market. Suppliers said, we're not going to provide our labor this way, and enterprise buyers said, well, that's a shame. This is how we're going to buy labor. And staffing companies adopted their models. A lot of staffing companies built or bought MSPs in VMSs. I think it's the exact same inflection point 20 years later, except it's the candidate that's the change agent. So all of us on this phone as providers, MSPs, VMSs, we can all say we don't want this to happen. It's the candidates that are going to really drive the adoption when this is how they want to be engaged. And I think similarly to how we saw staffing companies buy MSPs and VMSs, we're now seeing staffing companies create proprietary staffing platforms as a service solutions, as some kind of little incumbent tech offering. Differs from us, but we're seeing a migration to it. So I think it's inevitable for staffing companies.
Okay, thanks, Coop. And then finally, our last question, I'll ask Jonathan to comment first and then Praneeth, and then try to leave us about 1 minute at the end. So we'll roll quickly here. What do you see, Jonathan, as coming innovations in direct sourcing? If you look into your crystal ball, what's next?
I think the continued worker experience, everyone said war on talent at least once in this discussion, and I think that will continue. So if you look at traditional models right now, a large, call it Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 firm, if I'm a full-time individual looking for full-time, I have a doorway through the career page. If I'm looking for a contingent role, I have to go through a staffing firm. If I'm a freelancer, I've got to find an FMS that they use. Too many doorways into one organization. Our belief is the future holds a single doorway. I'm a worker. I can come to your brand because I'm interested in your brand, and I choose my own adventure. I tell you what I want. I want freelance. I want contract. I want full-time. And from there, I'm matched to the appropriate jobs that meet my skills and meet my preference for work. That, at least from our perspective, is where the future is going. It is a convergence of all the various aspects of how we find people today into a single platform, a single doorway.
Great answer. Thank you. Praneeth?
I just want to extend what Jonathan mentioned there, is that total talent approach is becoming the much more active dialogue, especially for customers who have already implemented the direct sourcing modeling. The next key step is how do you bring all sets of worker types and talent into a single point of management, including the sourcing strategies are getting unified from, what is my sourcing strategy for a role or a need to be filled. And in terms of customers looking at this, I think we all have to agree upon that while the systems, independent systems, and some modification customizations of the systems are keenly capable enough to address a lot of this, total talent space that everyone is working towards. I think we are looking for an uphill battle in our industry where the major part of HR tech industry is going to come in, slowly is coming into the contingent side, and we are colliding each other today. So there will be a lot of disruption when these two things coming in, and when that happens, it leads to a better solutioning from centralized solutioning, matching AI engines, chatbots. Several maturity models are going to be highly adoptable which are more personalized and candidate focused to deliver direct talent to the customers.
Thanks very much. Another great answer. So I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. I want to say thank you to the audience that joined us today. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. This forum is going to be happening on a quarterly basis. So I wanted to advise everybody that our next scheduled meeting will be on Tuesday, January 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern US time. So the same time as today on January 18th. Please save the date. Keep an eye out for the invitation that will be forthcoming. And then also I wanted to just let everybody know you'll receive a survey after the webinar. Please take a minute to fill that out and let us know how we did. And do understand that we use your input from the survey to plan our future topics. We want to keep the webinar very informative, very on point, and never salesy. So please join us again in the future. And right now, we wish you all a great week. Thanks for coming.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Brian.
Pierce, thank
Thanks
you.
for making this happen. Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Amazing questions. I wish we had a chance to answer all of them.
Agreed. Have a
Take
good
care.
day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.